And if you just saw something pop up on your screen, just click got it. So we're going to be recording tonight. That will be shared afterwards for those that weren't able to attend, or for those that want to reflect on some of the conversation and questions had tonight. For those of you who don't know me, in my hats within the Island Institute, I'm Kendra Jo Grindle. I am a Senior Community Development Officer and the strategic lead for our broadband and sea level rise work. While both topics may come up tonight through the questions that we get this evening, but also questions that we got beforehand during the registration, I'm excited to have an open conversation with you and your neighbors on Swans Island across many areas tonight. So some of the ones that kind of rose to the top before or while we were planning this were broadband, transportation, school population. But we'll tackle some other community priorities this evening tonight, just based on the questions that you ask. We'll also be hearing from our new president, Tony Chatwin, who you can see on your screen, hopefully, throughout the conversation, through some of your questions, but also just closer to the beginning around his new role, what it's been like at the Island Institute, and the vision he has for our work looking ahead. So just a couple of housekeeping. We're all on Zoom, and for those that are new to Zoom or very well seasoned at this point, just have a couple of things. So in your upper right hand corner, you can choose you can choose either gallery or speaker view, so the ability to see everyone at once, or to just see the person that's speaking kind of larger on your screen. Like I mentioned, if you're not speaking right now, please go ahead and mute yourself. You can keep your video on or off. If you do have something distracting going on in the background, just go ahead and turn it off for us. And if you want to ask questions, we're going to have some time later on. This is hopefully a conversation, so we do welcome questions. Just going to ask you to go ahead and put those in the chat throughout as you hear things that spur your interest, or you're coming in with a couple of questions in mind. Go ahead and put those in the chat. We're going to have some people kind of prioritizing those, and I'll be asking those throughout that Q&A. I might even call on you, just given the size of the group, to ask it on behalf of, to ask it yourself, depending on the question. And the last thing, if you do get bumped, you're welcome to join us by phone. The meeting ID and information was available in the email that you got from registering for this event. So just quickly, I'm going to go over a little bit about just the Island Institute. Some of you might be newer to our work. Some of you might have been crossing paths with us for many years now, but the Island Institute, we've recently gone through a strategic framework process. So we're really trying to focus and centralize a lot of our efforts. But the Island Institute was founded in 1983 as a community development organization, nonprofit, located in Rockland. We have about over 50 full-time staff members. For those of you that look at our building and wonder just how many people work there, we have over 3,000 members, and we serve Maine's coastal communities, including the 15 unbridged year-round islands that were really central to our founding. Along with strong and committed network of partners and supporters, we're working really hard to address some of the toughest challenges that face Maine's communities. And through a lot of conversations and our work, we've been able to strengthen our approach through a three-pillar approach, which includes activating climate solutions, strengthening resilient coastal economies, and empowering strong leadership to do all of those. Leaders are really central to our work. So looking at each of those, just to kind of give you a brief overview and outline, we make place-based investments that benefit communities and can transfer or scale to accelerate action on climate in Maine and beyond. It's really the core of our climate solutions work. And as the strategic lead for half of that work around sea level rise and climate adaptation, I'm really excited to see where we're able to leverage community involvement and centralize where those investments go. We focus on the aspects of our coast where the Island Institute is well positioned to have impact. That's islands, the marine economy, municipal infrastructure, and ocean-based solutions. And through our conversation and your questions tonight, we'll be able to expand on some of this and share some learnings, not only from your community, but also those communities throughout the coast and islands as well. The next pillar is right around resilient economies. It's critical throughout our communities, and it's been interesting to see how people are able to diversify their economy in the face of a lot of change. So this is another area where we are really strategic in our support and in our investment to increase the ability of our coastal economy to adapt to what's now kind of this interconnected global market, as we see the digital economy really come to the forefront and support the expansion of this work. Our focus is on the blue economy, the creative economy, and those climate response trades, the digital economy, as well as other businesses and services that play a critical role in driving and the coastal economy as a whole. Swans Island has its own stories of people looking to grow a business and diversify their income, to learn a new trade. And I really hope that we hear some of that and bring some of those stories to the surface tonight, because we really know that at the core of a lot of our communities are those thriving island businesses that ensure that year-round population can stay and really capitalize on the place that they live in. And at the center of some of this is, we start and end with people. Sorry, I'm just getting over a small child's cold. We start and end with people. So I invite you to visit our website and learn a little bit more about our new leadership model. We are excited to be piloting some of this work in the communities, starting with some of our island communities, and sharing what we've learned internally and also from our partners across the state and communities throughout the coast. So looking at the list tonight of attendees and those that registered, I see some familiar names that strengthen the Swans Island community through their contributions to local organizations, municipal government, and through extensive community support, sometimes being on committees for years to really reach the goals that they set forth. And we want to ensure that leaders have all of the tools and resources they need to not only support their community, but also themselves to thrive and grow as they shape a community's success and vision. So we've all probably heard the term, so-and-so wears a lot of hats in a community. It takes those leaders and wearing all of those hats to make sure our community really is able to grow and move forward in the face of a lot of change. And I think I speak for all of the staff members on the call tonight when I say we really want to make sure that we're empowering those leaders to balance all of those hats really well, so they can continue to thrive and grow within their community. So we're going to hear from some specific staff members tonight. And I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment, but you should be seeing not only myself, but Lisa Millette, Yvonne Thomas, and then, like I mentioned earlier, our new president, Tony Chatwin. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and take us into a little bit more of our conversation. So thank you again for joining us, and I just appreciate you bearing with me through some of that. So first off, I do invite, we have a couple of staff members on from other parts of our organization just to be, really available to respond to most of the questions that come up tonight. If there are questions that come up that there isn't a staff member on that's able to speak to it, we'll probably hold it and make sure it's addressed offline. But I want to take just a moment so you can kind of get to know the faces of a couple of our staff members that are on the screen. So I'm going to invite Tony, Yvonne, and then Lisa to come off mute and just briefly talk about who you are, how long you've been with the Island Institute. It will definitely vary, and your area of work. So again, that'll be Tony, Yvonne, and then Lisa.
Okay, well, thank you, Kendra Jo. And hello, Swans Island. Thank you very much to each and every one of you taking time out of your day to come and meet with us. And I look forward to learning from you about what's important for you and your community. I think I'm the newest, I won't say the youngest, the newest member of the Island Institute team. And I've been on the job for just over 3 months now. And I am loving it. Just as excited as on the first day I joined. So I don't know, Kendra Jo, if you just want a brief overview and we go through all the other staff and then we can come back, or.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and hear just from Yvonne and Lisa, and then my first question will actually be for you, Tony. So we'll come right back to you.
More soon.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Yvonne Thomas. I also am an islander. I live on Vinyl Haven, although I'm zooming in from a hotel room in Rockland. You know how that goes. But my area of work is strategic lead for our work in workforce and workforce pathways, really helping both students and adults find meaningful livelihoods and try to meet up the growing needs of industry along the coast of Maine. And then I also am the strategic lead for our work specifically with the unbridged islands. So that ranges widely, but a lot of the projects that we do in that area are around scholarships and small business support that's really focused on helping students and businesses on the unbridged islands. So very happy to be here with you tonight.
And good evening, everyone. I'm calling in from our office in Rockland, which surprisingly is having internet struggles. So I'm hoping I'm going to sail through this conversation with y'all without dropping off, but that is a possibility. So I support 3 teams here at the Island Institute. I've been here for 4 years. I'm helping form a new team, which we're calling Critical Business. And as we transition our small business work to be more focused and hopefully more impactful because of the focus, we're narrowing that to critical business. I also support our sea level rise preparedness work with Kendra Jo. And I'm also on our climate and energy team.
Great. Thank you all. And yeah, there are a couple of other staff lingering just in case we need them, but just based on the input that we had before and some of the questions that we got, these were myself, Yvonne, and Lisa were definitely the ones that rose to the top to cover some of the questions tonight. Which reminds me to remind you again, if you do have some questions, we have some ready to go because of those that were brought in through registration. But if you do have some questions to ask of any of us or anyone at the Island Institute, go ahead and start putting those in the chat and we'll start to pull those. But just based on the questions we got beforehand, Tony, I have my first question is going to go to you. So can you share something, and I welcome you to also expand a little bit as you see fit, but can you share something that you've learned or that may have surprised you about your first few months at the Island Institute?
Sure. Thanks, Kendra Jo. So I am new to Maine, but I am familiar with Maine and have crossed paths with Maine throughout my career. So I wasn't coming into a totally unknown part of the country for me, but I was delighted to see here as I arrived and learned about the work and met people to see and feel the entrepreneurial spirit that I see in sort of the islanders and the coastal residents. I'm really motivated by that, by people that are trying to make things work and do better for themselves. And so that was a really, I don't know why I did not expect that. I wasn't looking for that, but it's something that really jumped out at me. The other thing that I learned was, and this was a bit of an epiphany, I think, because as you'll probably hear throughout the night here, one of the reasons I was brought on board was to help increase the impact of the organization. And as actually as Lisa mentioned, this idea of focus and being intentional about achieving outcomes makes you want to prioritize certain things over others. And one of the things that I learned was how valuable the Island Fellows program is to the Island Institute and to the communities in which it serves. And so that is something that even if and the reason why it's so important is because the Island Fellows work on the community, on what's most important for the community at that time, and that may or may not align with this idea of scaling up our impact, but it's something that's really important, and I think we want to preserve. So I'd say, Kendra Jo, those are two things that have jumped out of many that I'm loving learning about my new home.
Fantastic. Yeah, and it sounds like you just bought a house, finally closed on a house here, so you're here to stay.
I am. I just got. It was tough. My wife and I just bought a house in Camden, and this was a very tough housing market. But we're delighted that we now have a place that we can call our own. So yeah, here to stay.
Right. Yeah, I think that most on this call are probably aware of the tough housing market we've seen over the year and change in our state. It doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. Lisa, the next question that came in is going to be for you. We were asked beforehand in registration about transportation and the important ferry service for Swans Island and other year-round communities. Can you share a little bit of an update about the Island Institute's work with the Main State Ferry Service, and especially as some of the opportunities come up to engage, how Swans Island community members or others might be able to learn more, participate in some of the public hearings and pieces of work like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kendra Jo. So as I alluded to a little bit in my introduction, our shift from small business to critical business means that one of the things we're taking a look at are those sectors that affect many communities or affect a community in a large way. And ferries being an obvious one, because they're the critical lifeline for island communities. They are how you get to work sometimes, they're how you get your groceries, how you visit your loved ones, friends, family, get to doctor's visits. And we got a great prompt from the state legislator who asked DOT to take a look at, or asked the Transportation Committee to take a look at the operating costs of the Main State Ferry Service. And we saw this as a great way for the Island Institute to engage by looking to the island communities that are served by the ferry service and seeing if there's a match on what DOT takes a look at as far as the future of the service, and if that matches the needs of the 6 islands that are served by DOT. So to that end, the Island Institute is hiring a third party to help us with that needs assessment. That's going to get kicked off in January. We're still figuring out what the nuances of islander involvement will be in that. It depends on both our capacity and the firm that we hire's capacity, as well as time and budget. So within those constraints, we're going to do as thorough as we can a needs assessment so that can be matched with the future scenarios that the Main State Ferry Service looks at for the future of the ferry system. I can add, in line with that, this past month, we celebrated the 1-year anniversary of Maine Won't Wait, which is Maine's climate action plan. So we'll also be looking at ways to not only make the ferry service match the needs of the islanders, but also hopefully a way that we can cut carbon costs and electrify partially or fully. But there's federal funding for pilots of that nature, as well as the plan laid out by the state that we're hoping to contribute to by helping the ferry system move in that direction.
Perfect. Thanks, Lisa. And how will you be sharing out any do you have an idea of how the Island Institute is going to share out any updates or opportunities for island communities specifically to engage around that work?
Yep, so we've actually asked each of the municipalities of the 6 islands served by the ferry system for a representative to join a working group. This working group will be our core group to look at different facets of the needs of the island. So day-to-day transportation needs, but also emergency service visits, contractors and building equipment. So the ferries are used in a lot of different ways. So making sure we're looking at a holistic way of how the ferries are being used and make sure that's reflected back. So this core group will be the group that we're going to primarily rely on as we build out how we're going to do that needs assessment with the consultant, this third-party firm. There may be additional pieces to get input in from communities. But we'll make sure to share that out widely. So if there are surveys or other ways that we can gather input, also feel free to reach out to me directly if there are specific things. Know that I'm available in that capacity.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take the next one that came in because it is around broadband. There has been, for those of you that are following some of broadband planning and infrastructure process in Maine, you might be aware that there's a lot of federal funding and state funding either available or coming to be available for both communities and internet service providers, depending on ownership model. And so the question was just a little bit around, what does that funding look like? How is Swans positioned, and potentially what other communities have been doing to leverage? And I can't speak highly enough of the work I see Tom Plock on and Jeffrey Ellison on as well, of the community, the Broadband Committee, and how dedicated to planning and preparing they've been. I have been in my role at the Island Institute for 3 years. I've probably been on Swans Island calls for most of that time, and I know that they started before I ever started at the Island Institute in this capacity. So while some of the faces might have changed, it's been incredible to see broadband committees just really stick with planning and leveraging their networks, leveraging their resources to keep moving forward, because I just got off the phone with a Bangor Daily News reporter before this call, and I echo something that we all have been echoing. If you're not planning, you're not going to receive funding. And if there's one thing Swans Island's community and the Broadband Committee specifically has done, is plan. So I really feel like Swans is in a good place to leverage the recent community vote. You secured over $1 million that could be utilized to leverage some more grant funding coming in, partnering with your current provider TDS to do a full fiber to the home build out, which is really impressive. And it definitely follows what we've seen some of our island communities do. And it's taking a really strong leadership role in their connectivity and what the future for their community when it comes to internet access looks like, and not stopping when other options come to the table, but saying, we have goals. We want to see that this is generationally accessible and scalable for our communities. So I don't know if I even want to share about other communities, because I think Swans has just done an incredible job of really sticking with it through a time where there was very little funding and a whole lot of planning. And now for the response we've seen from the current state administration and the federal administration to prioritize broadband, call it out as infrastructure. A colleague of mine says, I spend more time on the internet highway than I do on I-95. That's true for probably most of us on this call. And it's finally being recognized as that kind of critical infrastructure for the individual person and family. So I think that as federal funding comes in, while we're still sorting out where it goes, what it looks like, the new Maine Connectivity Authority will be in charge of most, if not all, of this funding, and they are just starting up. They have a nominated president who won't be confirmed until January, until legislative session is active. And then we'll start to hopefully see some of those funds roll out next year. But the current authority, the Connect Maine Authority, is positioned themselves to open an infrastructure round in January. And I know that I don't want to get ahead of myself or speak out of turn, but I do think that the Swans Broadband Committee and the community has their eyes set on seeing an application go in and getting some of that funding, which would really, I can't say enough. They're definitely set up for it and prepared for it. So that's a smaller amount of funding. It's, well, smaller compared to the large amount of federal funding, but large compared to what we used to see. So it's about a little over $6 million. It's that second portion of the $15 million bond funds that were approved in 2020. And so, yeah, I think and that doesn't end broadband either. I think one thing for communities to be aware of, and what we have learned from communities that have gotten to implementation and building out their infrastructure, is it doesn't stop just because the trucks start rolling and connections are made. You need to also make sure that the user, that resident, understands how to capitalize on that connection, how to leverage their resources, and really take full use of a reliable internet access. So typically it's the Broadband Committee, but also schools, libraries, and committees of other sorts that access the digital literacy, equity, and inclusion resource in our state to make sure there's low cost devices for end users, and affordability programming, digital literacy courses through the National Digital Equity Center and some other partners throughout the state. So, we're seeing our work shift to accommodate that as well. But the work definitely doesn't stop just because the connection's made. Now it's on the community to make sure that they know how to use it and gain all of those benefits of use that we hope that everyone can achieve because of it. And like I said, there are a couple Broadband Committee members on. So if I miss something that you hoped those on this call tonight would hear about your broadband process, feel free to throw it in the chat. And if you want to hear more, I saw Sue in the chat. Go ahead and start asking your questions there, so that we can keep this conversation going. But the next question I had, and then I'd really like to start hearing from those on the line that came in beforehand, is geared a little bit more towards Yvonne. And it was around school attendance. So the Swans Island school attendance has dropped to a level that the community hasn't seen for quite a while. They have about around 20 students in the K-8 grade school, and their usually averages closer to 30 plus. Is there something that the community or the school could learn from another island community who has been facing a similar change and how they've adapted?
Yeah, so most of the unbridged island schools have seen declining enrollment over the past several years. That's a trend for the islands. It's also a trend for most of the rural communities in Maine and for rural communities across the country. So there's definitely schools that are grappling with this too, and lots of different responses depending on the community and what kind of resonates. I think it is really helpful to stop and think a little bit about the contributing forces that are happening here, because a lot of times communities will kind of take it personally when their school enrollments go down, and there's just some things that are happening that are way beyond any one community's ability to sort of resist. And so it's kind of a math problem that has to do with demographics and population. We all know that Maine is an older state with the average age being 45. And so that's part of it across the state. And then, this past generation, there's a trend towards smaller families. And so those two things together, we know them, we see them, but they really do end up just with fewer kids in the state, and so fewer kids in our schools. And then there's other factors that can really contribute to making it difficult for islands in particular to attract families with school-age kids. And we know these too, and a lot of the work that you all are doing, is trying to address that. A lot of the Island Institute's work is trying to address that, but this sort of mismatch of workforce, there's tons of workforce needs, but then there's also people that have skills that can't really be used on islands, although your move towards broadband will surely help with that. There's a lack of affordable and reliable year-round housing, whether it's to rent or to own, lack of access to reliable and high quality childcare and pre-K. And so these are all things that also kind of make it hard for people to find their way to islands and to have their kids be in the school. And then there can be really sort of locally specific reasons. Sometimes there will be a group that's really a group of families that really get interested in homeschooling for any number of reasons, and that can pull the enrollment down at the public school. COVID concerns, whether it's about protocols or vaccinations or just health concerns in general. We did see on some islands this huge bump during COVID in enrollment, and then, more recently a decline. So there's a lot of things that can happen, sort of in a given year, depending on what's going on. And so, on one hand, what we see on a lot of islands doing and what we see you all doing is trying to address some of those barriers, trying to address some of the workforce issues, the housing issues, the childcare issues, the bigger issues like broadband, like I said. And then there's sometimes locally specific ideas. So we've had both Islesboro for many years has had a magnet program where they've attracted students from the mainland. That is a little bit unique to them because of their proximity to the mainland. It's a little bit of a different deal to take a 20-minute boat ride than an hour-long boat ride. And also with older students, it's different. But then we've also seen other things where some of the outer islands have had really declining enrollment to the point of not having any students. Matinicus has been through that multiple times, and they just have a commitment that they are not going to close their school, even if there aren't students. If they keep the school going, then students will come back, and they've had that happen twice just in the past 7 years. So really sort of deciding kind of what the philosophy is about the school. And I think just whatever it is, it's figuring out what's going to help support the school as it is now, supporting the teachers, especially. I just always have to do a little shout out to teachers, especially during COVID, shout out to families, and just thinking about how do we address immediate issues in our school to make our school as good as it can be, and how do we really get the word out about the amazing things that happen every day in your school and in all the schools, all the island schools. A lot of people just don't know. And so helping to create good buzz around your school. And then to the extent that you can, you all are in a somewhat unique situation where you're connected to the MDI school district, which is a big advantage in some ways. It also can make it kind of tricky in other ways. And so just sort of trying to really understand what those things mean, how that leadership works, and so that you can really have this great reputation and have this school that people are curious about and want to know more about, and try to help find ways to attract people to come. Again, the big picture issues have to be addressed, but it can also be something that we want to go to this school because we love what we're hearing about it. So telling those good news stories, which are always there, is also a great way to kind of help bring more awareness and eventually more people and more students into the school.
Thank you, Yvonne. That's really helpful. And Donna, I see your question in the chat. I can do a pretty good run through of where islands are on broadband projects. So for those of you that aren't seeing the chat, Donna's question is how many islands have already completed their broadband projects, and how many are currently funded and have their projects underway. So being in that build out stage. So Islesboro, Cranberry Isles, Cliff Island, and Long have all built out their infrastructure. Long is our most recent one. They, in partnership with Consolidated Communications, they're what we call an incumbent provider, the provider that already provided service to their community. They are entirely built out. They've just been waiting on one piece of equipment that was harder than they thought to get access to, but it has arrived. And so they'll be lighting up their system this month. So they'll see full fiber to the premise with Consolidated Communications completed this by the end of the calendar year, which is really incredible. They are another community that's been working on broadband for as long as the Island Institute has been working on broadband. And for those of you that know Mark Green, I think he had consolidated communications on speed dial, and one day it finally worked, and he got their attention and made a pretty strong case for a state funding partnership, and to be able to see that build out happen. Idaho and Monhegan are two that are Idaho, Monhegan, and Swans are two that are kind of right around the funding timeline. So Monhegan has funding secured through kind of a creative capital stack, which is federal funding through the USDA Reconnect program, state funding, and private and public town funding. So they needed a match for their federal funding, for their federal grant award, and so they do have a small portion that comes directly from their tax base, and they will be breaking ground if we can get them through some tower process. They will be breaking ground this spring, and their small community, they already have about 135 out of 150 odd homes on their community signed pre-subscribed for their service. So they have a really high subscriber, we call it take rate. So those ready to take the service once it's implemented. And their build will happen probably in about 2 months. They're a small community. They don't actually have poles. They're laying their fiber lines to alongside their water lines. So it'll be a pretty fast build for them. Idaho is in the process in a state application to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration for a grant to build out their infrastructure that will be with Axiom Technologies. And we were supposed to hear back in November, but the federal government is anything but fast, for those of you that have sought other grant applications. So now currently it's timed for, they say early next year. So hopefully by the end of March, we'll know if Idaho, along with 9 other communities in the state, have access to that funding. And again, small community will be able to build out pretty quickly. So we expect that build out to happen within that calendar year. And then Swans Island is definitely primed and ready to seek funding and potentially break ground or build out within the 2022, 2023, that kind of timeline. But bigger community, longer timeline for expansion. And then almost all of the rest are in some form of planning. I'm sorry, I missed one. Shebig is in the same boat as Swans. They are had a town vote and ready to go after some state funding. So Shebig is another one that if they are to get some state funding out of that January infrastructure round, we'll be able to move pretty quickly towards a build out. And state funding usually has a year timeline on breaking ground and building out those projects. But the remaining communities are pretty much all actively planning or engaged around broadband in some way. Some of them are working with that provider that's already in their community. Some are actively trying to seek other solutions. Some of the ones in Casco Bay, specifically those that are a part of Portland, are going through a process of planning with the city of Portland to identify what that could look like. So yeah, that's where we are broadband wise on islands. Definitely leading the charge. It's incredible to be able to say, by the end of 2022, 2023, 9 out of 15 of our island bridged islands will see, potentially full fiber build outs and equitable service to all their residents. And I hope that number actually just ticks right up and we can get them all. Did that answer your question, Donna?
Yeah, it sure does, Kendra Jo. Thank you for that. I think it's really exciting to think of the 15 islands that many islands are so far advanced already. And, and some, like Islesboro, has had their project done for a number of years. So that's super exciting for those of us who are struggling and have switched over to Elon Musk's Starlink and, would like to come back to, a community broadband project as a subscriber.
And I have to, again, I don't know if my compliments are enough, but I have to compliment the Broadband Committee, Tom and Jeffrey and others that were able to reach out and connect with Starlink early on. And, even if it's a short-term solution, to get to that longer-term solution that meets everyone's need in the community, it is nice to not see you freezing up, Donna, or dropping off every time I'm on. It's nice to see. So again, ask your questions in the chat, but I'll keep asking some that came in with pre-registration until we see some more coming in from you all live. So this one came in for Tony. It says, several of us have mentioned the high cost of, so some of us have mentioned the high cost of tough real estate market, high cost of housing. So the question is really, is there a role that the Island Institute is planning to play in helping to create or share solutions on affordable housing issues specifically?
Well, thanks for that question, Kendra Jo, and to the person who posed it. That is something that we actively exploring at the moment. I think given what you heard in the opening sort of presentation where it talked about workforce development, our focus on the housing issue, which is really broad and complex, would probably be more aligned to the workforce development and sort of the limitation that affordable housing for the workforce represents. That's where we are at the moment. I mean, I think there are a number of models that are emerging from island communities where there are island-driven efforts to purchase the property and turn it into affordable housing for specific professionals on the island to make sure that they retain their teachers and other key employees. So I think that's a very interesting model, and we're looking into what we can do, if nothing else, sort of to share examples of approaches that can work. But we're still looking into that issue because we recognize it is very important, not only to the islands, but also on the coast.
Thanks, Tony. And I think we can, over the course of this work, there have been some really unique paths forward for island and coastal communities when it comes to affordable housing or ensuring that some members of the community or business sector are prioritized when it comes to housing purchases and staying and remaining in the community. This one I got directly, so I'll go ahead and ask it. Climate change is a pretty pressing issue for our coast, and wondering a little bit about how the Island Institute plays a role in tackling the concerns of, rising waters, warming waters, so sea level rise, warming waters, and the increasingly high cost for energy on islands. And I'm going to ask this of Lisa, if you can. And I think, some of this, if for those of you who are in Maine, we're going to see some really high energy costs and fuel costs, especially over this next winter. So, what we're doing to navigate some of those impacts.
Sure. So we're addressing climate change in some areas, and I'll acknowledge we're not in others. We are focusing on a couple different areas. So I mentioned where we can engage with the Maine's climate action plan, the ferry systems being one of those spaces. We're also taking a look at our business community and where we can cut energy costs in our business communities, largely by connecting them with programs through Efficiency Maine Trust. Since I'm talking about Efficiency Maine Trust, I will also plug they have great residential programs. So highly suggest hopping on their website. At the very top of their website, there's at home, at work. So if you hop on their main page and click at the at home, there's a great listing of the programs they currently offer and the different rebates there, not only just through Efficiency Main Trust, but also what has federal rebates as well. As far as the adaptation portion goes, I'll talk a little bit about our sea level rise preparedness, and then Kendra Jo, if you are willing to pick up where I leave off, that would be great. So I work with Kendra Jo directly on that. We're engaging with different communities up and down the coast and the islands to ready themselves for what we're facing. There is a climate readiness checklist that has been developed that is a great tool to help communities assess where they are as far as readiness, and also give them some key ideas of where they can move forward into the future. And as we work also with businesses, we're also having them put that same hat on of how can they be more resilient? How can they be more ready? So is that a diversification of their business? If they are a working waterfront business, so a fisherman, a lobsterman, is it some way that they need to reduce their overall operating costs? So helping them look at how can they buy into solar? Can they change their refrigeration system to decrease their operating costs there, and helping them look at their different energy uses to lower their utility bills and help them move into what we know what's coming, which is, higher fuel costs, warming waters, rising seas, all that fun stuff that's ahead.
Yeah, and James in the chat, community solar, tidal, are there other opportunities that maybe weren't specified in that question that we're also looking to support, or other communities have tried to leverage to reduce costs or create a more sustainable community around energy and connection? I can speak a little bit to a lot of communities, both at the residential and municipal level, have really been leveraging solar. There are some really good rebates and grants specifically for solar in several island and coastal communities, not necessarily on the ground solar farms, but just having on the town office, having solar panels, at the transfer station having solar panels. So utilizing infrastructure that already exists to host and at least cover the extent to which the town buildings and infrastructure are relying heavily on energy resources, and potentially creating some backup battery systems for the winter months, for some of those times when or even during peak times where you might be paying more, but to offset that cost. And then I feel like tidal has been a little less in Maine, but we're definitely working with Eastport through some energy work in partnership with the Island Grid Resource Center and others, to talk a little bit more about what tidal could look like. It's not necessarily for everyone along the coast, but there are some of those options as well. And I think if you're interested in knowing more, we can definitely connect you with a couple of our energy team members climate energy team members who can dig into some of those details, or just show really strong networked examples of what communities have been able to do. And residents themselves, I feel like just driving, I see more and more solar panels on individual people's roofs. I know for even myself, I've been looking at the Efficiency Maine website around, what's the first step? Solar panels, heat pump, hot water heaters, heat pumps themselves. So some different options. And I put the link that Lisa mentioned in the chat if you'd like to go there and see some of those options at the residential level. So this one is for Tony. So before the call, a community member wrote asking about the Island Institute's role in helping fishermen and new aquaculturists grow a wider variety of species, specifically scallops. Can you share our plans for our role in this aquaculture sector?
Yeah, so that's an area that the Island Institute has been very active in prior to my arrival. The past several years, there's a very strong training program that was available to, I think the primary participants were lobstermen who are looking to diversify their revenues. And I think there were 5 cohorts. I think about 120 people got trained. We are now rethinking our role in that because we feel that we made a significant contribution on the training side, and there are many other entities that are continuing to train on the aquaculture front. I think now our focus is going to shift more to from those 120, about 30 aquaculture businesses started, and we're going to shift our focus to making sure that these businesses become profitable, because that's what's going to that's what's going to contribute to the livelihoods most directly of the island and coastal residents that are engaged in that. And it's also what's going to diversify the economy the best. These successful businesses will lead to improved well-being. On the scallop issue, I'm not sure that we have something specifically focused on scallops. I know we partner with Hurricane Island and their research program. They are researching and developing sort of best practices for scallop aquaculture. And I had the pleasure of going to visit their work, and I'm very excited about the potential there. But my understanding is that it's in its very early stages. But as someone who really enjoys scallops, I am looking forward to seeing that industry grow.
Yeah, and I think we've in the past we've held some community to community exchanges in a time where we're all comfortable going, and it's warmer. First off, once it's warmer and we're all feeling comfortable going and traveling to other communities, that's usually a really great opportunity to see what some of this programming and diversification within a fishery can look like. So I know in the past we've taken fishermen and aquaculturists from one community to another. I think there's probably some hope that we can get back into that in the future, as well as we see more opportunities along the coast. All right, let me just check the chat one more time, and then I'll probably end on a question for Yvonne. It's not seeing one there. So Yvonne, this last one's for you. So island and coastal communities share quite a bit of the same challenges. I feel like island communities they have similarities as much as they have differences. And so wondering a little bit from your perspective at the Island Institute, but also just your perspective as a community member on another island, how you're seeing other islands respond to the kind of very narrow focus of population changes at the school levels, both on islands and off. Because you did kind of mention that, just in the last 2 years, we've seen some upticks and some declines, and how we think some other islands have been tackling that.
Yeah, so it's true that there's so many similar issues, but I always say the islands are kind of like children, like they have the same mom and dad, and you'd think they'd be exactly the same, but they're all so different because of geography and how isolated they are and who's living there. So it's even, even though the one room schools like on Frenchboro and Monhegan, Matinicus, those kinds of islands, they're all really different too. So we have seen this range of responses from like, no matter what, we will not close our school, which I think is a very good one. And we're all kind of familiar enough with, if you lose your school, you really do eventually, not very too far out, lose your year-round population. So keeping your school in some capacity is sort of a guiding principle, I think, for all of our year-round island communities. And then it really is like thinking creatively, thinking differently. Some schools have really invested in different leadership structures, seeing that what they were trying to do, even if it worked really well in the past, the whole like, we'll have a principal, we'll have these many teachers, this is what we've always done. You know, some islands have really realized that that's not possible, and they have to mix things up so that they can grow and shrink as they need to. So that's one. People have invested in different kinds of programs to attract students and to sort of have a reputation. We're a more of an environmental school. We're more of a science school. We're more of a hands-on learning school. So trying to figure out what a school does really well and just really lean into that and do that. So there's definitely not one answer. And I think, as I said, with Swans, because of the relationship with MDI, which again is just such a benefit, but also can sometimes be a mismatch for some island schools that are associated with bigger districts. So I guess I will punt this one a little bit at this point, just because I see we're at time, and invite anybody who wants to talk more specifically about strategies that might work for Swans and connecting with other islands that maybe have similar issues, depending on what, you know, which part of it you want to kind of try to really dig into. That would be helpful. And I encourage you to reach out to me, and then I can try to connect you with islands that have done something, you know, around a particular aspect of this concern, which is a big one.
Thanks. And Donna, you make a good point in the chat as well. I can speak to my time as a fellow on Islesboro. There were these ebbs and flows in school population as well. You know, you might have a classroom size of 2, and then all of a sudden you have a preschool that's filled with 5 to 10 kids. And, you know, you're just waiting for them to grow up and get into the larger school. And so it feels like sometimes it's this little ebb and flow, these pockets of years where there's a lot of babies coming, and then all of a sudden there's a little bit of a lull, and the school has to prepare for some of that as well in the population. So it's good to hear that there's a good little bit under the age of 5 out there in the community. So with that, and understanding that for some of you might have dinner waiting on you, and or a family to get to, we're gonna start to wrap up. Again, thank you just first off for joining us tonight and giving some of your time. For those that submitted questions beforehand, I really appreciate it. If you asked a question tonight in our chat, either directly or in with everyone, thank you for those as well. If you have follow-ups, if you want to reach out to a staff member, not just the ones that are on here tonight, but any of the staff members of the islands too, feel free to reach out via email or phone. All of our contacts are listed on our website. There will be a follow-up email for everyone who pre-registered. So those that are on the call right now and those that weren't able to attend tonight, this is recorded. So there will be a recording that goes out, and you'll be able to share that with your community or watch it at any point. And I just want to thank you all for attending. I think, you know, we've been having these conversations virtually. I think I speak for all the staff on the call tonight, and you know, everyone at the Island Institute when I say we can't wait to be back in communities having conversations, you know, in the Oddfellows Hall or around someone's kitchen table. Those are definitely some of the best conversations that we get, you know, have the privilege of having. So we're pretty excited for next year and being able to get out and in the warmer months and when everyone's comfortable and have some more in-depth conversations. I'm sure Tony's excited to get out and see each one of these communities, island and coastal, in his next 6 to 12 months as well. So with that, we're right at 7. So again, thank you for attending. Really appreciate it, and hope to talk to you in some capacity in the future. Have a wonderful night.